from the Pix 11 social media center. She's got more than 30 years on the streets as an investigative reporter. Now, Pix 11's Mary Murphy takes you deep into the world of cold cases, terrorism, America's drug crisis, and more. These are the Mary Murphy Files.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of the Mary Murphy Files on Pix 11 Facebook Live Thursday night. We're usually on Monday night. And I'm back again with my friend and colleague of many years, Anthony DiStefano, author, Newsday reporter, and all-around mob expert. You guessed it, we're here to talk about what happened on Staten Island overnight. Well, actually last night. The Gambino boss gets whacked. That's the subject of our special tonight. We've covered the mob collectively over 30 years plus in this.
It has to be. It has
yeah.
to be.
So when you heard about this, were you shocked?
I was shocked. I mean, Francisco Cali, was a guy who was very low-key. He was very, no criminal record to speak of.
Living on Toad Hill, Staten Island.
Toad Hill, Staten Island, very nice community area. And really wasn't bothering anybody.
Now, there's his SUV, a luxury SUV. And what came out at the press conference today is that he may have been set up to come outside.
Yeah, the indication was that there was an accident, and it looked like it was a staged accident, which got him to come out of the house and confront the assailant, who was the guy with the gun.
In a blue truck?
Yeah.
Okay, so he came out, and then all of a sudden he's hit like at least, what, six
times? Yeah, it was about a minute conversation. It wasn't very good conversation, very acrimonious, and then the guy fired 12 shots.
Okay, we're calling this the first mob hit of a boss in over 30 years. The last time was Castellano. You're not so sure it was a traditional mob hit?
I'm not so sure it was a traditional mob hit in that they were targeting the boss to get rid of a boss. And he was a boss by committee, really ruled with other people. I have a suspicion that it wasn't because of the flamboyant nature and the way it was done at his home with his wife and family inside. And at a time when, look, if you're going to do a big hit on the street, in this day and age, there's going to be license plate readers, video cameras all over the place. It's not a smart thing.
Right, and the chief of detectives, Dermot Shea, had a press conference today and wasn't being very committal about what exactly had happened, but did say that they were looking into his past life. Here's a little bit of what the chief had to say.
This is preliminary, and I think it would be a little erring on our part to make any judgments. Certainly we're exploring what his prior life or current life has connections to the incident last night. It also could have nothing to do with it.
Which is kind of what you're saying, Tony. They're being a little guarded, right? They have to be careful.
They are, and I think they've done this business long enough and they've seen enough of these cases to realize that it could be something that you're just totally off the wall. It could be a personal thing. He could have had something in his business life. He could have just.
What is his business?
Well,
his business?
It was construction. He had construction companies. I think he had some business with trucking as well. But he had his own business.
Okay, so you talk about history here.
Right.
And we used to see a lot of rub-outs of the bosses going back 50 years. And I did a little piece about that. I want you to take a look at it.
I will.
Any hit on a mob boss always makes sensational headlines.
The guys who did it, they looked like male whites. All three had tan trench coats.
And it's been 30 plus years since Gambino godfather Paul Castellano got whacked outside Sparks Steakhouse. The rub-out, not sanctioned by other mob bosses, propelled John Gotti into the role of Dapper Don. These mob hits are usually dramatic. In 1957, Albert Anastasia had settled into his barber chair for a shave at the Park Sheraton Hotel when a 5-man hit squad shot him dead. In 1971, Joe Colombo was shot and paralyzed during an Italian-American rally in Columbus Circle. He died 7 years later. The execution of Joey Gallo at Umberto's Clam House was considered retaliation. In July 1979, Carmine Galante of the Bananos was rubbed out in the backyard of Joe and Mary's restaurant in Brooklyn, his cigar still hanging out of his mouth. Yet after Castellano and the Colombo mob wars, we didn't see much action for nearly a quarter century.
John Gotti paraded himself up and down Mulberry Street, and it was one of the things that brought him down. The mob has a rule which says no more bodies in the streets.
But then came 2018, when Sylvester Zatola Sr. got whacked at a McDonald's drive-thru in the Bronx. just months after his son survived an attempted hit outside his home. A former undercover analyzed it.
He kept rolling over, and the way the guy was shooting wasn't professional. It wasn't a professional hit.
And some were speculating that Bloods gang members might have been connected to some of those attempted rubouts in the Bronx last year, and one of them did succeed against Sylvester Zatola Sr.
Right,
yeah.
at the McDonald's drive-through.
Right. And there were some Bloods members, alleged Bloods members arrested.
Yeah, that's true. And they think, but law enforcement people I've talked to think that there may be Albanian gangsters ultimately behind that one.
Yeah.
So,
you know, people are talking today on the web. They're writing on. We have a lot of people watching, by the way, Tony. And one gentleman, Tino Di Piero, said, Gene Gotti, John's brother, just got out of prison last year. You know, he went away for drug trafficking. You know, could he want to wrest control of the family back? I mean, there was all this speculation going on.
well, let's analyze this, and this is what people in law enforcement have told me. This is a different era now. You do a racketeering murder like any sort of mafia murder is a racketeering murder. You're going to go, if you're caught, you're going to go away for life. Gene Gotti just got out of prison. He's an older fellow. He's 72 years old. He's been through the mill. Why would he even want to do this? I can't answer for him, but it's good speculation that he has nothing to do with this.
You know, we have some footage of John Gotti from back in the day, and he got a lot of attention, more probably than any other mob boss of recent memory. And people said that the mobsters learned from what happened with Gotti. He got too much attention. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He sort of sought the attention. He wore those $2,000 suits. So since then, it seemed a lot of these so-called bosses laid low.
That's true. I mean, Cali was one of them. He's a guy who really didn't do much. And the committee he was part of with the Sicilians, they laid low. And a lot of other people now are laying low. And nobody's really vying for that mob top spot. Because once you do that, you're going to get the heat of law enforcement on you.
Right. Now, Andrea Cavalier is our producer tonight, as she always is. And I believe we have a split screen that shows Callie and another man who is allegedly helping to run the family, Dominic Cephalou. There it is, right there. Right. And I had been told by you, probably, Tony, a couple of years ago, and some law enforcement, that there were 2 or 3 people very quietly running the Gambinos. And do you think that's still the case? Obviously,
well,
Callie's not here now, but...
Yes, I think that's still the case from the law enforcement people I've talked to as of today. Dominic Cephalou, Frank Callie, and a couple of others of Sicilian origin or background.
Cefalou's from Sicily.
He's from Sicily.
Right.
And Callie's family's from Sicily, and the other people involved are also from Sicily. They're the sort of effective powers in the family. Although Peter Gotti, John's brother,
yes,
is on paper the boss, and he probably will be the boss until he dies in prison.
That's interesting. So, but the guys from Sicily, how did they get the control from the Americans?
Well, the Americans, particularly the people who aligned themselves with Gotti, set themselves up for the fall. And Gotti, as you mentioned, was really out there, talking, being publicly, he liked his public, he liked to be out there in the nightclubs, he liked to do a lot of things. So he was just setting himself up for the big fall. When the big fall came, he took a number of people with him. And that was a cascading effect because his case brought other cases, and it sort of took everything down. The Sicilians realized this, and they're here, and they realized it doesn't pay to be out front.
Now, Sammy Bull, there's a picture of him there. He was the turncoat witness who actually only did 5 years in prison for 19 murders, and then when he gets out, gets in trouble selling ecstasy in Arizona, and he's out of prison again, I think.
He's out, yeah.
So it's just pretty remarkable. We also have some footage from Sheepshead Bay, a murder that happened back in October, and then there was an indictment, I think it was either overnight or today. In the Vincent Zito murder.
That's right.
And he was a 78-year-old alleged loan shark, not a big guy in the mob. But a man has been accused who's a Gambino associate, Andrella. Right. And I think there was surveillance footage maybe that showed him going in the house that day.
There is, yeah. They said that in their announcement today.
So what would the motive be?
Could have been robbery. We're going to find out more. They say in the press release that came out with this indictment that he was looking to get his loan assets, as it were. They didn't say loan sharking, but they said loan assets or property. So we're going to find out.
But you don't think that has anything to do with what happened on Staten Island?
I don't think so, no. No.
You know, like, Zito got killed in October, and now this man.
Yeah, I think the Zito situation was particularly that situation between the two of them, and I think the man knew Zito and, may have allegedly, anyway, gone after his property.
So you're saying it may be a personal beef.
Could be.
It may. You don't think we're seeing the start of a mob war? I mean, there were those attempted hits and one successful hit in the Bronx last year. Now we have an alleged mob boss whacked on Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems people are getting more brazen, more gunfire than I've seen in a quarter century.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you have to take each of these apart, and the law enforcement people and police I've talked to said the Zatola situation, number one, looked like it was possibly by the Albanians muscling him on his
All right, but we're
business.
seeing now the thing from last night. We're seeing the
Right.
SUV. And
Right.
in this case, very high-profile whacking.
Right.
Whether it's a personal beef or it's something business-related or something involving a woman, you never know what it could be.
You don't know. And that's the thing. Right now we don't know. But here we are in 2019. The police have a lot of technology to use that they didn't have back in 1985. The license plate readers we talked about, the video cameras are all over the place. I'm sure there were plenty of video cameras on Toad Hill where this happened. So, we're going to see. I think we're going to see pretty soon. They're working pretty hard on this.
So I want to go back to one of the individual cases from more than 50 years ago, and you've written at least 8 books, if not more, on the
Right,
mob,
yeah.
different figures. And did you do anything with Albert Anastasia?
Anastasia was in my book on Frank Costello. He was a good, close friend of Frank Costello.
So you talk about a sensational headline. This guy's going for a shave.
He's going for a shave.
In a
and that
Midtown
was it.
hotel, and all of a sudden 5 guys come in. They called it
That's
the
it.
Barbershop Quintet.
Yes.
And Carmine Persico, who later ran the Colombos, said that he got Anastasia.
Right. And do we know for sure? Well, we don't know, but that's the legend.
And he would just maybe possibly be bragging. You don't know. He
Yeah.
just died. Now, what
just
about
died.
Carmine Persico just dying last week? Do you think that could be tied
I don't
into
think it
this?
has any tie-in, but things are fortuitous. I mean, all of these things are sort of happening, and I think many of them are unrelated, but it's an interesting coincidence.
Interesting time in
Yeah,
mob
really.
history. And then yesterday there was an acquittal for 2 alleged higher-ups in the Bonanno crime family.
Right. That seemed to be a case that appeared to be weaker than the government thought. Although you had some pretty interesting arguments that these guys were targeted because they were Italian Americans. That's interesting. That may have played with the jury. We don't know.
Okay. I'm going to talk about one of the other well-known cases, Crazy Joey Gallo from Umberto's. That was, I think, in '72, and it was a year after Joe Colombo
Right,
was
that's
shot.
right.
And Crazy Joe, he was shot. They blamed him for the hit on Joe Colombo.
They did. There was some talk about that, and there were a number of people who set up. Well, they were waiting, and I think fortuitously came across Gallo when he went to Little Italy that night, and they saw him in Umberto's, and they took him out.
In the Joe Colombo case, he was alive for like 7 years, paralyzed,
That's right.
incapacitated.
That's right.
And I think that's when Carmine Persico rose to power because he couldn't function.
Well,
as
he
the
couldn't
boss.
function. Colombo
Right.
couldn't function, and Persico was his ally in the family, and of course Persico then can make his move.
Okay. One of the big hits that Pix 11 was on the scene probably faster than
I know
any
what you're
other
gonna say.
station. Which one?
Begins with C.
Carmine Galante.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he had he was smoking a cigar at lunch in the backyard of that Brooklyn restaurant, Joe and Mary's, and we were there very soon after. And one of his bodyguards was killed, but when I was doing a little research, find out he had 2 Sicilian bodyguards in addition to the other guy, and they kind of just stood up and made their way out when the hit started.
They made themselves scarce, and ultimately, from what I understand, they got their promotion in the crime family because of how they acted.
So they were in on it.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Okay. So, let's go to the most recent hit before last night, and that was Paul Castellano at Sparks, 1985.
December.
And this allowed John Gotti to be put into the position of new boss. He did not get sanctioned from the commission, right?
That's true. That's true. Gotti sort of felt out somehow that some of the other bosses would have felt about this. He kind of got a positive indication from 2. That's the story. But the others were, particularly the Genovese crime family, was set against it.
So as we wrap up with what's just happened on Staten Island, how would you assess the situation tonight, what law enforcement is doing? I'm sure the FBI is involved with the NYPD and other agencies on this.
Well, I think the NYPD is probably leading the investigation at this stage because of the technology they have and the sort of resources they have on the street. The FBI, has been stripped of some of its organized crime personnel because they've gone into terrorism, rightly so. I mean,
Right, post 2001. I mean,
absolutely.
I did so many mob cases in the late 80s and early 90s, and then once 9/11 happened, we kind of all shifted toward following a lot of the
we
terrorism.
all did, even as
Yeah.
reporters. And so I think the Bureau is now trying to pump its confidential, informants to find out what's happened. I don't know how this is going to be solved. I mean, is it here in the United States? Is it back in Sicily, where Cali has its family roots? Is something going on in Italy or Sicily that we don't know about?
You mentioned the technology. Well, the license plate could have been changed. It could be a phony license plate or a no license
Well,
plate.
that's true.
Right.
The thing is, you're going to be able to track the vehicle someplace, and this is going to take a lot of patient detective work.
Right. And you're writing another book?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so what's your newest book going to be
It's
about?
Gotti's Boys. It's about the
All right, so
men
let's
who,
show Gotti one last time. Yeah. I mean, I know you did something on Frank Costello. You've done wonderful, wonderful work.
Thank you.
And so what is Gotti's Boys going to be about?
Gotti's Boys is going to be about the people who were with John Gotti from the early days when he was the Fulton Rockaway guy and had his crew out in the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club and helped propel him to power.
Right.
Gotti had to make that move against Castellano. It was a desperation move for survival because Castellano was onto the fact that some of Gotti's people were involved in narcotics.
And that's why Gene went to prison.
That's
his
why Gene
brother.
went to prison.
Right. And in fact, they're saying now, as we get ready to wrap up tonight, they're saying that this guy, Callie, was involved in drug trafficking, oxycodone, which is sort of a big part of the opioid crisis, impacting so many families in the United States and, of course, here in New York and New Jersey.
That's one of the things that the police are looking into. They're looking into all of those aspects of his life, legal and illegal.
Yeah, so oxycodone and whether or not he was trafficking would be part of the investigation.
Sure.
Of course.
Possibly even cocaine. Who knows?
Right, and it's very early in the investigation. It's not even 24 hours old.
Not even 24 hours.
Right, so we'll keep on top of it, and
We
we'll
will.
follow you, and I hope people follow me too, Anthony.
I hope so.
I thank you for coming in tonight. I know
Well,
how
my
busy you
pleasure.
must have
It
been
was
today.
fun.
Good luck with your next book, and I hope everyone will read it. And I hope you'll be back Monday night for the next Mary Murphy Files. Thanks for being here tonight. Good night.